It is Kristi. It is Sunday, so it is time for Weekend Winter. Sorry I'm a little bit late. Been organizing things. You guys can't tell, but I have rearranged my whole setup, and I've got my lights and my camera and my mic all on like the same stand. It's all very exciting for me. But anyway, I hope you are doing well wherever it is, whenever it is you are in the world. I can see that I need to turn this a little bit. There we go. Now I'm a bit more centered. Awesome sauce. So yeah, how are you guys doing on this Sunday? I guess it is all day Sunday, as it normally is. Can you hear my stomach? I really need to like eat before I do show. But anyway, I hope yeah, you guys are looking forward to some geekness because we're gonna geek out a little bit. Hey Trans Gamer Girl and DN fan in the chat. How are you doing? I see you. I don't have you up on screen yet, but I do see you. Yeah, so what I've got planned for us today is a lot of geek, a lot of nerdy things. But before we start with that, we've really been putting off our it's also July here. I might have to open up the window. Ooh. Oh, that's a little too breezy now. Oh no, that's too breezy. That's good, and the traffic is so good. Yeah, it's getting a bit warm here, a bit humid. We'll let that breeze pass through for a while, and if it starts to get too loud, hopefully you can't. Oh, you can hear that. Never mind. I can actually see. I can see the wind. I can see the wind on my microphone. Clearly not a good idea. Yeah, so we're gonna get a little bit nerdy right away because we've been putting off Thomas Kuhn and the paradigms the paradigm of scientific revolution. Not any slant on Kuhn. It's no shade on Kuhn. It's just you know, like it's stuff to wade through, and you need to be in the right mental space. Now, of all the things that I've talked about so far, probably Kuhn might be something that y'all are more familiar with because it is. When it comes to the philosophy of science, it is one of the more like popularized, especially in like the Anglo tradition, popularized understanding and contribution to the understanding of science. By the way, if you're having coffee or tea, cheers, a little morning sippa there. So yes, we're gonna situate Kuhn within the broader history of philosophical developments in the sciences. And this morning when I got up, because I was up, I think by the time I got to sleep it was like 5:30 in the morning, because I ran a game last night. Hello Angus. Therefore I was really hyped up and I couldn't get to sleep afterwards, even though we ended like at 4-ish. So this morning, instead of like getting out my tablet and typing up notes and making a whole PowerPoint thing, I just like I did it by hand because I couldn't be bothered. And if you see steam on my glasses, that's just so hot. So ignore it. It's just warm and humid. So, and I'm a bit steamy. But yes, well, where we are in terms of the actual book itself, just to locate you, and if you're not following along every week, we are looking at science, nature, and society, alternatives to empiricism. And when we talked about empiricism way back, there were 2 chapters sort of dedicated: empiricism and positivism in science, as well as some problems of empiricism. So warm. July in Germany. You wouldn't think it would be. I think I can get away. Yeah, I think I can get away with that without actually sort of like having a wind sound. Maybe it was just lagged. Awesome fun game. Yeah, no worries. My players are so good. My players are so good that like even when I'm worried I'm going to hurt them seriously, they come in. Well, I also, to be fair, as a DM, I throw a lot of treasure and magic stuff at them so that they feel super cool. So I kind of let them become OP, but that's kind of the point of the game too, right? Is to be big and powerful and, you know, like do some cooperative butt kicking in a fantasy world. There was a lot of that going on last night. So yes, we talked about the grounding of natural sciences, and also in following on the tradition, the social sciences. The social sciences are generally tend toward empiricism and positivism in their approach. Now there have been challenges to that. Like we're going to get on. We've talked a bit. Like we're going to get to feminism and some of the contributions of critics of that kind of positivism, and looking at knowledge in a more expansive way. But so far in this chapter 4, we've looked at Marxism in science, Weber Merton and the sociology of science. Then we discussed historical epistemology and structural Marxism, and we are now on to revolutions and relativism from Kuhn to the Strong Program. We're not going to get done with Kuhn today, because there was it was just I couldn't prep all that in the time that I had. But what we're going to talk about is locating Kuhn within this developing tradition of almost like a self-reflective understanding of science. So the authors write, Ted Benton and Ian Crabb, that the historical approach taken up by Kuhn used an historical evidence approach, used historical. So his historical approach, took historical evidence, and the result was an undermining of the view that science is this progressive accumulation towards a greater approximation to the truth. Truth is a very loaded term philosophically, as well as of the scientific community's rationality and its presentation as a disinterested group of people who are combining or fitting facts with, and that was. So I guess maybe to our modern ears, especially if you've listened to my content a lot and really thought, like you're quite, shall we say, friendly to the idea that social constructionism can provide us with information on human life and the social world in a way that, the same approach won't necessarily be applicable to atoms and other non-organic life forms in physics particularly, but even chemical processes in chemistry and so forth. And, it is very much grounded, if you think about the values and the ethics around that. Why was sort of like this notion of being a disinterested rationalist who is above subjectivity and the influences of that important? Well, that was very much the vibe of Western European thought, German, and primarily like German and English, I'd say, and in French, right, as well. Was Descartes Belgian? I hope not. Maybe that's just I'm thinking of Poirot because he's always mistaken. I think Descartes and Rousseau, but I don't know if you want to get more political philosophy. But this idea that it was both aspirational and normative, in that it tried to make a claim, a sense of superiority, as it were, by saying, look, I'm not putting my social views into this, I'm not putting my biases into this, I am being neutral and objective. I am just like a window through which these things happen. And if you buy into social constructionism, the critique of that isn't too groundbreaking, but I guess for some people this really bursts some bubbles, because we're still talking about Kuhn's contribution, and it was an important one. So he focused instead, rather than on the narrative of science, and that scientists like to talk about and teach, and say about themselves in the past, Kuhn instead focused on the historical changes in scientific understanding. So like, don't tell me, words are nothing. You can't, walk the walk. Don't just talk the talk. Let me see how you practice this science thing. I know how you talk about what you say you do. I know how you think of yourselves as doing it. It's like that meme of what my mom thinks I do, what society thinks I do, what I think I do, what I actually do, kind of that. And Kuhn's like, no, let's just actually go look at the evidence of scientific progress or scientific processing. So he focused on the historical changes in scientific understanding, and the way that and to be honest, when we're thinking about this in terms of science, but really this paradigm he's describing, I think is quite applicable, and the critiques are quite applicable to any group that claims to have a sense of or be a source of true knowledge. As I was thinking about the parallels to religion, that Kuhn's paradigm critique also has applicability, and probably too, like in other areas of life, other areas of knowledge, like maybe art or the humanities, how humans have a tendency to want to find explanations, and we do want good explanations because it's important that our reality maps onto or our experiences, our understandings map onto reality. Doesn't we're not gonna operate within reality correctly. You know, like if you are, for instance, if you take up the position of anti-vax and that goes against the actual physical scientific reality, you know, like in terms of the understandings and how it all works, well, not getting a vaccine might turn out very badly for you. And that ultimately is the problem with having bad information. Like imagining what cats are thinking or Nagel's bad. Okay, Mills. Right, so what did Kuhn go back and identify as overarching process themes as he looked at different ways of scientific advancement? Well, first he says, you know, like a field will open up or a new area will open up. And there will be a lot of competing approaches. At that point, the space starts to fill up with, there's no groundwork, right? Think of it, you can think of it again, like a parallel with evolutionary reality. If, I believe understanding like when when situations change or a new environment is dramatically altered, the first life forms that start to form out of that have a real wide variety, because at that point evolution, like time and pressure, hasn't had a chance to impact on their lives and their ability to reproduce successfully. Right? So you have all this variation, and then over time it gets whittled down as some versions are able to compete better or get advantages, and so they have more in the population, and then things kind of settle into a new rhythm, right? I think that there are some parallels here when you have a new field, such as, let's say, the idea of, you know, geology. Right? I remember reading this really whack school book that was published in the 1950s, maybe late 1940s, early 1950s, and they talked about contraction theory. The idea that the reason why we have mountains and valleys and high points and low points and earthquakes and whatever else is because the earth is like some rotting fruit. Sorry, I have to clear my throat here because it's the morning and I haven't spoken yet. So, and the idea behind this contraction theory is, if you think about an apple when it's fresh and ripe, right, and it's all plump, but as it decays, the internal structure starts to go down, starts to kind of compress. It can't hold the fullness that it previously held. And as a consequence, the skin of the apple starts to get ridges. Right? It gets high bits and low bits. And this was the theory, right? It's kind of cute now. You think, oh, bless. But I mean, maybe people think about that, about plate tectonics later. Well, this idea that the earth was like, it had a molten surface, right? So it was all kind of covered in hot magma, and then as it cooled, it contracted. And that contraction, it was one contiguous, this is the difference, it's one contiguous like form of a surface. The contraction of that as it cooled was what created the mountains and the valleys that, you know, we now observe. None of that is true. But it's a brilliant story. You know, it makes intuitive sense. It has a level of plausibility. It includes other science, like the idea that, you know, like things contract, you know, or whatever as they cool. I guess ice, you know, expands as it cools. But there was, you know, it wasn't plucked out of the air. It was people really making an effort. Completely wrong. Completely, totally wrong. And so as a consequence, now we have plate tectonics as a theory, and it's just taken as a given. And the reason why we have plate tectonics and not contraction theory, and at the end of the day, is because over time, plate tectonics was able to more accurately explain and predict what we observed in the world. Right, so this idea of, you know, a field opens up and then people start to try to provide explanations. There's competing explanations, and eventually, as he points out, one of these explanations emerges as the consensus, and then it becomes the basis for all research. Meaning, yeah, you have all of these competing theories, they try each other out, and then at some point, the scientists who are working in that field just like end up preferring one explanation, and as a consequence of that consensus, that becomes the area where you work with it. If you're doing contraction theory now in geology, you're probably not going to get a post anymore. I mean, you could probably maybe get a post if you're doing it like on the side, but you would probably have a very difficult time getting your research published, because that's just not the paradigm. That's not the set of explanatory factors that a geology like expert or a peer review is going to accept. And so those ideas end up getting filtered out, and you have this structured paradigm that people assume is the correct way to go about it. The third thing he then noticed was that once that consensus is reached, it becomes a paradigm. So now plate tectonics is our paradigm. When we understand earthquakes, we begin with plate tectonics. We don't think, oh, well, it could be contraction theory, plate tectonics. No, it's like we have a worldview already set for us. And fourth, research becomes problem solving, right? Instead of exploring the problem as whether or not it's this theory or that theory, you start from the idea that it is plate tectonics, and now how do we explain phenomenon from within that paradigm? And when the application of this set of assumptions and understandings fails, in this situation, the failure is put onto the researcher, not to the paradigm. Right? So at this point, it's become so embedded, so static, so assumed that, if I go and I test a theory that should work, let's say I'm going to go test a partisan identification theory of vote choice, and I find out that party identification doesn't explain anything. Well, one, I'm going to be surprised because, that's, like, let's say I've come up with a new variable, which is, some sort of like way of measuring something that's like party identification but different. Or, I have two variables that I've added that haven't been added before. Party identification goes away as an explanatory variable. It's such a big explainer, but let's just say it did, right? And I'm like, oh my god, this is amazing. If I just control for these other two things, I explain more than party identification does in terms of how people vote. I'm going to get published in the American Political Science Review. Right? And what I will probably get is rejected, because the idea that, something so new and novel that everybody else has missed would just not be accepted as sort of like plausible on its face. People would be very skeptical, and they would come at it with a certain approach of, well, I really need to unpack this and understand this. And as a consequence, those kinds of negative findings tend not to get published. There's an entire journal, I think, dedicated to negative findings, because within the scientific community, broadly, there is a tendency to publish works that confirm current theories that end up providing like a positive, statistically significant effect. And if you put in a model and you test a model and it has no effect, your paper is much less likely to get published. So we know that there are biases that go into this knowledge production. However, when you claim a level of objectivity, when you claim a level of, what is the word I'm looking for? Detachment, right? Oh, I'm not interested in, advancing an agenda. I'm just here to tell the truth. I'm just here to report the facts. It is a mask for that bias that might exist even on a subconscious. This is going way longer than I thought, so I'm going to read out some chat. So, imagine what cats are thinking. Does a cat know it's a cat? Continents smashing into each other really, really slowly. Yes. With all the flat earthers online, I'm pretty sure there are contraction theory believers. There might be. There very well could be. Sometimes a consensus gets forced on science from the outside the field, exactly, like geocentrism, which is with a religious imputation of what they wanted reality to be onto scientists, and then not letting them report whatever observations that might contradict that. And the pathologizing of homosexuality as a mental illness. Yeah, and trans phobia, or like people who are trans too, like cis heteronormativity, deciding anything that doesn't look like it is abnormal. And that is, a classic example of science claiming to be objective when it's obviously smuggling in values. There should be no consensus in science. Consensus inside scientific communities is a sign of capture. Sadly, corporate business has invaded science and controlled the funding. Well, I mean, there might be, I think, businesses have always funded R&D because they want to develop their products. In terms of university funding, there are public funding, like the National Science Foundation. And I'm not saying that those aren't skewed toward certain, let's say, funding certain research over others. However, just like as a person who's been working in the field and has watched a lot of my colleagues apply for research funding, you know, whether it's a Leverhulme grant or a Marie Curie grant or the Economic and Social Research Council or the National Science Foundation. Yeah, I'm, you know, and again, there's probably less investment in the social sciences and its research than there is in the natural science. Medical technology companies have, you know, a self-interest in sponsoring PhD students who will research a question that they don't want to, you know, hire someone long-term for or whatever else. So yeah, but to acknowledge that these kinds of self-interests and values do shape who gets, you know, like in terms of like maybe like you know, there are more PhDs for things in the natural sciences that could be turned into a profit than there are for understanding, than there is funding for understanding, you know, like native-born Europeans' attitudes toward immigrants, you know, something like that. So, sorry. All right, so moving back, or getting back to Kuhn. Now, Kuhn thought that paradigms are needed. It makes a lot of sense why we would have a paradigm, because it's efficient. If we keep rehashing the same debates over and over again, we're really not going to get anywhere. And especially if one, you know, empirically tends to be, does a model or does a theory consistently help us, allow us to either, one, explain or two, predict, right? Because explanation is not prediction, as we've discussed. These are two different approaches to understanding the world. One is theory related, the other one can be atheoretical, and just designed to optimize your prediction ability atheoretically. You can completely do that. But by having a paradigm, some problems persist, and there might be challenges to that paradigm. Because how many theories are perfect? You can even look in physics, right? New technology, new developments led to an entirely new understanding of how the world existed fundamentally on a structural level, and that was a great challenge to the given atomic level paradigm, determinism of Einstein's physics versus the probabilistic basis of quantum theory. So, sorry for the coughing. All right. But when there are persistent challenges and questions, this ends up leading to a loss of confidence in that paradigm. And if you keep finding problems, okay, well, you know, we explain 95% of it, but yeah, this 5% we can't explain. Or actually, it looks like we can explain about 70% of it. But as some new research has come out in this new field, you know, there's a whole bunch of cases that we can explain as well with this given theory. It might be the case that there is enough eroding of the efficiency or the utility or the acceptance of that paradigm that it becomes a crisis. One parallel I can maybe offer is the crisis in UK polling after, was it 1997 election? I think it was. Yeah, I think it was 97 because it was predicted. 97 or 92. Someone in the chat will tell me. But it's when Labour was meant to win and the Conservatives ended up winning the election. So all of the polls in the UK were showing that Labour was going to be doing better. Labour was supposed to win. I think this was when John Major was running against. Oh God, I can picture his face. A tall guy, lanky, but I can't remember his. Is he the one? Neil Kinnock? Is that who was running against Major? This is like a long time ago now. But anyway, and the election came in. Conservatives won, and people were like, whoa, because the whole point of polling and survey data is to be able to predict an outcome. And obviously there is some margin of error, shall we say, because people can change their minds. People who thought they would vote might not. People who didn't think they would vote might vote. There might be an event that completely shifts public opinion. So, I mean, predicting the future is always difficult. However, these polls were out. And for the next, I want to say like 5 years, huge theme. And even like to today, people in the polling industry in the UK talk about this as, you know, like this big trauma, not trauma, but it was a big deal because the whole like polling and survey methodology community really had to reflect. They called it the crisis in polling, and they had to go, okay, where's the problem? Is it in our methodology? Is it in the way we ask the questions? Is it in you know, who responds? Is our bias in the non-respondents? And that's where they developed the idea of shy Tory syndrome, and, you know, tried to adapt to that reality. So you can see that these things happen, and once you understand Kuhn's notion of scientific revolutions, you can see this process in a lot of fields. The Sun newspaper claimed all the credit. Yeah, you know what? Like statistically, like they can, but when you run models, no, it was not the Sun what did it. Although I'm sure they would like that kind of influence, but no, that particular headline doesn't change. So the reason why we can discredit that claim about the Sun is that the polling data didn't suddenly change after that. The polling data was wrong all the way through, so it wasn't like there was a significant shift. There was a fundamental problem with non-responses. And there was a bias in people who didn't respond. And it's fine, like when people, you could say, oh, all surveys are biased in favor of people who answer surveys, which is kind of true. But here's the thing, like if people who are not willing to respond to surveys are really no different from anybody else, then it doesn't matter because you're not missing any information. However, if people are reticent to participate because they don't want to talk about their politics, and all of the people who are doing that happen to lean conservative or be conservative, now your non-responses have a bias in them. You're not picking up things that actually exist, and you're mistaking your random sample for a generalizable sample, when really your sample is sort of already skewed in favor of people who aren't of that political. Hey, Po Mama Sid, how you doing? We're getting all nerdy here on the show. And I gotta, like, dang it. Okay, we're gonna get going. We're like, literally on the second paragraph. It's like, we're nowhere. So I'm gonna race through this because I want to get to this, expose you all, not to anything that would cause the police to be called, but to a video that I started to watch this morning and wanted to kind of shout out and give you a little sample of. You can go watch afterwards if you're interested. It's a bunch of people tearing down James Lindsay's misunderstanding of Hegel. Fun for us. All right, so crises are resolved only when a consensus reform. Yep, all right, so for the paradigm leads to a loss of confidence and can accumulate, zoom, 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 thank you, Vespa, into a crisis with a plurality of alternative and conflicting approaches emerging again. So one of the instabilities of this paradigm breakdown is you end up having the same situation you had at the start of the field, which is a lot of people step in and try to account for the things that couldn't be accounted for or why it can't be accounted for, and they are all now trying to basically establish themselves as the new paradigm. So now Kuhn thought that paradigms are needed, but some problems persist and challenge will lead to... Oh, I did that part. All right, so crises are resolved only when a consensus once again forms, but this time around a competing approach, and then quote-unquote normal science can. A classic example of this is in physics, right? We had Einstein and gravity and understanding everything from that perspective, and then as technology advanced, like I didn't anything, people, scientists, started to find evidence of what would become quantum theory, and the emergence of this completely new evidence that could not be explained by Einstein created a crisis, because they thought that they had found everything. They were looking for the theory of everything. They thought that this part of it was part of the theory of everything, and now they found out that ain't. They're missing pieces. But once after evidence was accumulated and there was discussion and debate in the scientific community and in physics, now we have norms. Now we have a consensus around quantum theory and the quantum world and how it operates and how we can try to understand it, because it's really weird, but it's settled down again, right? So there was this upheaval. Now we're back to, all right, we know what we're doing again. Let's all get on with it. Now we have our framework for quantum theory. We can get on with the job of doing science. So Kuhn actually likens this process of scientific revolution to a social revolution. The key point is that the paradigms are a source for conducting and evaluating research, which is, what is the word I'm trying to write here? Oh, hello, windy day. Oh, but it's such a nice breeze, so I'm really hesitant to close the window again. Which is consensual, I think, within a particular discipline. So they have a shared set of theoretical assumptions. They have a shared ontology, or what exists, right? They have a set standards for evaluating explanations, and they acknowledge past scientific achievements in that tradition as being valid. So they have this framework for establishing this new paradigm. I really got to zoom through. All right, so the sense that after a scientific revolution, one inhabits a different world, right? A new paradigm does not in any way, any straightforward way or sense, build on the past achievements of the science. It's a rejection more than an acceptance. I'm going to have to... It's too windy, too windy. More of a rejection than an acceptance. Again, we can think about that plate tectonics. In this case, everything got chucked out about contraction theory, and it was, we moved on to a different theory. When it came to trying to apply atomic theories to the quantum world, you couldn't. So you had to develop something completely new. And instead of saying, okay, yes, science is this process where, neutral people just put in pieces of information and we build this knowledge pyramid, and it's all brilliant. And we all, it's like a steps. We're all just like walking forward. Kuhn's like, no, it's actually a really discontinuous process. When you chuck out an old paradigm, you're not building on the old, you're kind of creating stuff that's new. So his particular characterization of paradigm shifts made his model challenging to earlier views of the scientific revolution. Paradigms carry with them their own standards of evaluating explanations and judging between rival theories. That was one of his conclusions or observations. Right? And there are no neutral standards to judge between rival candidates to become the new paradigm. So even the terms, this can also create a problem, even the terms that rival theories have in common, for instance, mass and time, are defined in different ways. And therefore, the meaning variance between these two understandings results in people talking past each other within these rival theory dialogues. They talk at cross purposes, and is the strongest sense in which theories can be said to be mutually unintelligible. I don't know what that line is, so I'm going to move on. I'm writing notes as I'm drinking coffee this morning. So the rival theories don't necessarily contradict each other because they're using definitions, but they are talking past each other. And Kuhn made the observation that no objective or justifiable decision for procedures, that they have no objective justifiable decision procedures for basic theory choice. When it comes down to deciding which theory is the preferred one, you're going to have the influence of what he leaves is, it's not some objective thing. You have a sociological approach. You have to talk about the way that people play a role in determining what becomes a paradigm. So to understand these changes in science, you have to take a sociological approach. It's not a neutral process, but it's a power struggle. And it's a power struggle within the scientific community. And it has influenced things by who runs the journals and the key ideas at certain important universities, and the uses of rhetoric and propaganda might all play a role in determining this last, determining the direction of what becomes the new paradigm. And Kuhn, however, despite all of these observations and critiques and reflections and summaries of what he observed, remained committed to his view that science does progress through revolutions and that new paradigms, what is that word? Oh, new paradigms cultures, I think, are an advance over defeated rivals. So then I have a note to myself, read bottom para, page 60. So let me come back here. This will be the last part of it, and then we'll watch a little bit of James Lindsay getting schooled on Hegel, and then we'll be done for this week. All right. Here's the bottom of page 60. Kuhn's great achievement was to have brought to the center of the debate the recognition of historical transformations in scientific beliefs, including transformations in concepts of what science itself was, and the role of social processes within the scientific community in bringing about such transformation. Although Kuhn himself was not a relativist, and believed that science does progress through paradigm shifts, many of his arguments pointed in a relativist direction. This sparked off a major debate in the philosophy of science and made possible a revolution in the sociology of scientific knowledge. Okay? Isn't that kind of almost like poetic justice? That Kuhn's work, sets off another paradigm shift. And in many ways, Kuhn's comments on paradigm is now paradigmatic. It's a paradigm in and of itself. So the next thing we're going to turn to a little bit is we're gonna dip into Feierabend. Feierabend. That's how I'm pronouncing it. It's kind of funny because it's not spelt as like. How do you Feierabend? Yeah. So there's a German word which means to like. It's kind of like literally translated into like celebration evening. It's when you're done with work. So that moment, like when you you check out for the day, you are then like it's Feierabend. It's not your free time, and it's just kind of funny that like Feierabend is not spelled like that, but it's the same word. And we'll also touch briefly on Lackentos. And then we'll finally get to feminism. So sorry, I couldn't cover all of Kuhn. There was just too much, and I talk way too much. And yes, so I think you guys are just listening to me blah 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 blahing in here. So I'm gonna see Jolly. I'm gonna suggest that actual polling data is intentionally manipulated to drive an intended outcome. I sadly no longer consider the West to be really democratic. Check Chomsky on democracy. I would just have to just disagree with that from being in the field. So I don't know. Are there polling companies out there that do give people the responses they want? Yeah, I mean, I would point to Rasmussen as a particularly bad poller. But in all honesty, I think you have to come down to rational choice theory here. When you come to groups like Gallup or Pew, very long-term, very reputable polling firms, also a lot of a mix of doing public opinion work and marketing research, such as Ipsos Mori and YouGov. There's also NatCen, the National Center for Social Research. There are a lot of groups. I mean, I would say the vast majority of polling firms and survey data companies, if they get things wrong because their models are biased or their sampling is biased, they're not going to get clients. People want to know things accurately. So there's no self-interest for a polling firm, unless they're a propaganda outlet, to get things wrong or to not try to be rigorous or not try to be accurate. Because if you have a bad reputation, then people aren't going to use you, right? Like people laugh when you just like the word Rasmussen because their reputation has been pretty much trashed. Whereas Pew and Gallup are seen as quite reputable. So I know people think that about polling, but when you actually look at the self-interest of the polling companies, there is really, it's like scientists who are pushing a theory that doesn't explain the world and trying to get their journal articles published. They can't, because like their stuff is just dodgy and it can't get through peer review. And it's the same thing with polling firms. So I mean, I don't know what Chomsky says on democracy, but I don't think it has anything to do with the methodological approaches that, and there are entire courses. There are like 2 weeks long, 4 hours a day courses that you can take like during the summer, intensive courses just on sampling. Like different forms of sampling, internet sampling, face-to-face, mail back, the procedures, like what is the response rates, what are the sampling rates for like any missing populations, what is the effect of people who don't speak like the dominant language, the effects of what order you put the questions in, the question wording, the options that you give, whether you give people a 10-point scale or a 100-point scale or whatever else, all of these things are studied. And yet the last polls, at least since they weren't wrong. Again, so John, I'm just gonna say, like, this is why we have a margin of error. If you look at like the state polls, shall we say, were less accurate in predicting the presidential outcome in 2020 than the national polls. Well, why is that? Because it's pretty easy to get a generalized national poll, whereas with specific states, especially very small populations, and then participation rates are going down, everything else, it's much more difficult in a smaller, like, geographical setting to get something that is accurately, it's very expensive. So that's why you have margins of error. And if you look at the results and you give them, don't look at the point estimate. The point estimate on a poll is not the real number. The point estimate that you see, like 34% or 40%, is merely the midpoint in the range of what the margin of error is. So I think part of the problem is people think polls should predict specific numbers, whereas in fact they predict ranges of numbers. And you can have confidence when the two ranges of the points you're looking at are so far apart that they can't be explained by the margin of error. So, no, the polls weren't entirely wrong. I know that's a nice narrative, but it's more complicated than that. And yeah, so we can have that's a completely different discussion on like survey methodology, but I think that it's a false. If you're thinking the poll should know a number specifically, then you're not reading the margin of error part at the bottom, and that's a big part. The problem of that is the media. The media oversimplifies polling, and they oversimplify everything. But what they want to know is, oh, someone is up 1 point, someone is down 2 points. None of that matters. Up 0.1, up 3% might not even matter depending on the margin of error of the poll. Like, that's just noise. That's even not, like, the race can, like, you know, let's say the point estimate is between 40 and 45, and the other person is, like, over here, right? So this is 40 to 45. And you get one survey that's at 40, and you get another survey that's at 45, and the media will go, oh my gosh, so-and-so went up 5 points. No, they're still within the margin of error. There's no shift. Nothing's changed. You think a 5-point swing is big? I mean, honestly, a 5-point swing in a poll would have a pretty low sampling size. But let's just say, like, or even like 3 points. 3 points doesn't matter. So it's an overestimation of this horse race that comes to be a problem. All right. So my right in thinking Foucault looked at Kuhn and built on it for his idea of episteme. I will have to look into that. I know a bit about Foucault, but in all honesty, like his work came at the very tail end of my mad brief through philosophy, and I think I kind of pointed to his theories on, I think his theories on the opticon or the what is it the thing like the panopticon that is very interesting and talks about, you know, state power and also biopower. He's got some very interesting comments there, but it doesn't really get into I haven't used it in terms of his ideas in my research, so I can't give you a specific answer on that. All right. God, I need a haircut. So hey, what did people think? By the way, I don't know if y'all saw it. Maybe I'll put it back on because I have a new pre-show thing, and because we talked last time about how stale my stuff was coming up. So yeah, you can still hear me. Yeah, so I made this for you. I don't know if you guys, what you think about it, but I just made videos of the paint by number app that I have on my phone, and you have an option when it's done to make it into a little movie, which is kind of fun. And I thought, oh, all right, that might be kind of cool as a change, you know, to get a little bit of culture from different parts of the world. So yeah, you have to tell me what you guys think about this. And in all honesty, it doesn't really matter because I'm you're stuck with it for a while. Alrighty, Daddy. So for the last bit of nerd today, we're gonna take a look at, and this time I will have to get my camera. All right, good question. Large screen. All right. Yep. Let me set up the screen for y'all. Yeah, it is very relaxing. The painting opening, perfect. Good. Yes. Like the intro animation, for sure, cool. I also found it pretty chill to watch. I mean, I slowed it down to almost like the slowest thing. So the videos were normally about 30 seconds long, and I've made them like each a minute and a half, just so it's not going so fast. And cool. All right, I'm glad people are enjoying that, because I was looking for cheap ways of entertaining you. It seems I found it. Yeah, and also you might be inspired. I ended up, as a consequence of doing those art pictures in the Happy Colors app, not a sponsor, just giving credit where credit's due, is I went and looked up, like I ended up learning about the first one with the big wave. It comes from a very famous Japanese artist who was working with woodblocks and carvings. Now, it was a whole industry in Japan at the time, so it wasn't as if he was carving everything in himself. He designed the artwork, and then within the shop, like, people would cut out the blocks of wood, and then they would print it off, and they would print it off until, you know, they had sort of like rubbed away the initial cuttings to the point where, you know, it was it would change the artwork, and there's a whole series of them. Anyway, it's very cool. All right, one thing I will need to do is it's okay. I'm a little bit in the corner. Hey, now I'm centered again. All right, we're gonna go to minute 19, and because this chat that we're just gonna kind of dip into. I think it was about 1930. Oop, is God. Crocoduck is in there trying to suck up too. Anyway, yeah. So they had this conversation about James Lindsay's takedown of Hegel, and you've got people here who actually understand Hegel. Oh, that's not what I want. And so yes, I thought it might be useful because there's so much crap being put online about continental philosophy generally that I thought it might be nice to hear people who know what they're talking about kind of explain why he's right. Views of Mount Fuji. Yes, I can't remember the exact, if that's the name of it, but yes, Hokusai Mount Fuji. Yeah, people should go check it out. There's a YouTube channel that, like, Understanding Great Art, perhaps, is the name of the channel, and the creator dips into different artworks, and exciting. I know the big wave painting. Oh, you've got it in your Animal Crossings museum. Nice. All right, let me put your sound on, because I'm sure you guys actually want to hear what's being said. I find that's very conducive to. And yeah, dismantling James Lindsay's takedown of Hegel. So we've got, what I can also do here is if people want to watch this after, we're going to dip in for about 10 minutes. Because I've got to go. I've got a friend who is cleaning up from the floods. And I promised her that I would make myself available after 2:30, my time, to help her clean out her basement or whatever else. So you can go watch this after my show if you're looking for something to do. All right. And you'll hear who all these people are, but they all seem very smart and nice. So,
get anything in a Hegelian perspective that's truly immediate or
I can up the quality.
You know?
In fact, you have a lovely quote about the grave of the actual, I think, somewhere in Hegel, which I can't remember where exactly that was from, but it kind of elucidates that the second you think you actually have something, it's the memory of that thing, you're moving past it.
All right, so realizing that we've actually given him approximately 5 seconds to speak.
There's one thing very quickly that I do just want to interject on.
Please.
And
so the reason I'm starting here is because I think these critiques overall of Lindsay are good. And I think exposing you to these critiques will help you if you want to, counter some of the misinformation or give a perspective to someone that they might not have heard. So that is why we're starting it basically like 19.
That it's I know very little about James Lindsay. I see people talk about him an awful lot, but I've never really bothered to investigate him because anything that I hear him say has either felt like superfluous nonsense or like there's something in there, but he doesn't care enough himself to actually say what he's thinking and is relying upon the grandioseness of the tweet to do most of the talking for him. So it's just never felt like something I've cared about. But what really got me into this one was that his decision to call it a hermetic religion was like my partner is studying a study of religions, so vicariously, because I take an interest in other people's lives, I started going to some of those lectures. And one of the things that I spotted immediately within the study of religions is that 9 times out of 10, very often when people will say X is a religion, they've no fucking clue what they're talking about. Because one of the things that was made very abundantly clear to me within those lectures was that the question, what is a religion, is one of the most hotly debated topics within the field itself. Whether you want to take a sociology of religion, philosophy of religion, anthropology of religion, so many different perspectives. So when he says X is a religion in this regard, what I'm trying to pay attention to is he being descriptive, or is he kind of using it as an ushering concept to kind of bypass that idea and to just like gesture you onto the train so he can take you for a ride, and then you make a lot of the connections for him so he doesn't have to justify his positions. This is one of the things I want to be paying attention to.
Such a good and succinct summary of an insight that what James does is, rather than, and honestly, I saw King Crocoduck doing this too, right? What is a social construct? Oh, it's something that was developed by a society. That's not a, and what is a social construct? Oh, it's things that people put together and there's some values underlying. Never gives a proper discussion, never gives a proper definition, a specific definition to engage with. Instead, he throws the term out there and then allows the listener to just fill in the gaps. And the problem with that is that we talked about, just talked about Kuhn, people talking past each other because they're using language that they're using terms, but in completely different ways. So when they try to communicate, they're actually missing out on any understanding. And James Lindsay is doing that by leaving the sort of gaps. People fill them in, and then it makes sense in their heads, but everyone's understanding in their heads is different because it's not a clear delineated boundary for what a concept is, what an idea, the definition is. So I just thought it was really well put.
Can I make like let's see if I can make a brief point as well, because this entire thing started with Gregory asking, what is this guy really about, and here I have somewhat of a thesis, which is that he belongs to this new tradition of right-wing ideologues like Jordan Peterson, like Ben Shapiro, all of these people who basically are there, whether consciously or not, to build a narrative, to build some kind of ideological lens that they can basically sell to the common people, and sometimes not to so common people, but to the public, let's say, so that they can, in a sense, justify a given set of conditions. Okay. Now, some of those conditions are imaginary and some of those conditions are real. Part of the climate change thing, when they start to talk about the real science of climate change, they are indeed, defending a certain set of material interests there, which are those of, obviously, the people that pay them, right? Which are people that are also, highly connected with the oil industry and so on and so forth. So I think that, James Lindsay here belongs to this tradition of people that are here to produce a narrative, an ideological narrative, to sell to the common people, and they are paid, by people who have material interests in this particular ideology being spread around. So I think that,
if you compare, let's say, the motivations of Kimberly Crenshaw, the founding, basically, mind behind intersectionality as a theory, her purpose was, she was looking at the empirical world. She was looking at the lives of Black women in particular. And as she was focused, very specifically at understanding this subgroup dynamics, she could start to see how white feminism failed Black women, but also how the civil rights movement and other discussions about racism were very centered around cis male bodies. And so there was this gap here where Black women, were experiencing both sexism and racism. And no one was talking about that. No one was talking about how these things combine. And so she empirically grounded her understanding of the problem and gave it a name and talked about it on a causal level. Like, how do these things work? Like, how do we understand intersectionality as a description of the location or the multiple locations at which people's identities come into contact and produce something that isn't part of the homogenous? And if you only deal with like feminism, because feminism tended to be centered on bourgeois white women in the 1970s and 80s, then a whole group of women aren't getting discussed because they're being covered up by this dominant hegemonic group's norms. And so that's what she did, right? She went out, she looked at the world, she thought about it, she analyzed the causal structures, she developed an explanation, an account that filled in a gap in our knowledge so that we could understand the world more accurately. And then she went through the peer review process. That's what she did. Like, she got a law degree and became a scholar and got a job and, did it on the professional level and opened her stuff up for everyone to see. James, not so much. He's just BSing. He's half reading things, and rather than being interested in the truth, he's interested in fitting whatever information he has into an already pre-established.
This is basically what he belongs to. And that is what I was saying at the beginning, that we're going to be fighting against the Pokemons that he is himself constructing there in his own mind.
So they made this reference earlier about like putting Pokemons into like your ideas, and then people go and they're like, oh, here's a Pokemon and I discovered it. You think that you're figuring something out, but all you're doing is buying more into the BS.
Through his own ideological lens, right? He's interacting with the real world, and he's actually going to talk about certain things here that are correct. Okay, and this is one of the parts that I think is completely true, which is that the worst lies are those that are based on true things, right? And he's going to say certain things that are true, but okay, and this is the important thing here, he's going to use the reality, okay, as a means to put inside of reality his own Pokemons so that we can all, search for them and fight against them. But in reality, those things don't exist. When he talks about the woke being a religion, okay, and this is something that he says a lot, okay, he talks about religion because I think he's one of those like conservative atheists kind of type, or maybe I'm wrong here, but he's, projecting the fact that he knows that religions produce a certain kind of behavior, a certain kind of mental patterns that are problematic, okay, that stop critical thinking and so on and so forth. And he knows that a lot of his audience also has this information. And basically what he's trying is for the people that watch him to fill in the gaps. He says, this is a religion. And then everyone immediately says, oh yes, in my mind, religions are bad things. Therefore, whatever he's saying is a religion is also a bad thing. So he's just doing, this, what is called a mind-stopping cliche, with this sentence. It doesn't have any content. It's just a mind-stopping cliche.
Just as a final note, he is sort of showing his hand a little bit here, because there is a book that was pointed out to me by Glenn McGee called Hegel and the Hermetic Tradition. And I think what's going on here is somebody who's informing him has told him about this thesis in the very abstract, and he's bought his own bullshit. So this book characterizes Hegel as being in some sense related to Hermeticism. That of course has like a lot of religious connotations and connections. And so he's gone, oh, Hegel is this woo-woo thing. Like, and then he's doing exactly what Zan and Victor say. So let's let the man speak.
All right, so at this point, they managed to get, I think, about 30 seconds or a minute into the video. But they had already so many things to say. And in a lot of ways, hearing them break it down from a perspective of actually understanding Hegel and philosophy, like a lot of the points they make aren't necessarily original, like they're saying things. But I think hearing people who do understand a topic say independently come to James Lindsay and come to the same conclusions, I would call that a triangulation of evidence. I would call that, like a cluster of independent studies that you can go and then look for a larger pattern of, like ideas or things. Alrighty, daddy. I see Sebastian in the chat says there's a clip from James Lindsay saying that he is basically writing nonsense about gender. Yeah. I mean, Chris Rufo basically came out and said, look, we're going to, we don't actually care what, critical race theory is. We're going to make it be anything that has a negative connotation and And I don't know if you guys probably didn't see this, but, well, people like James and Mythicist Milwaukee and other racists turn a complete blind eye to the inclusion of white supremacist talking points for decades, since the Civil War, since the establishment of public education, basically. That the taxpayers' money has been used to fund the teaching of pro-Confederacy talking points. And here we've got the latest they're not, so we've got what's the cancel culture, and we've got a complete attack on, again, truthfulness or even dealing with the problems of racism in American society. Texas just in 2019-2020 school year finally taught that the Civil War was the main cause of, that slavery was the main cause of the Civil War. Because they had like states' rights and blah, 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 and slavery in that order in Texas school books. You have entire generations being indoctrinated into pro-Confederacy lies that slavery was not a significant cause of the war. It's all dressed up to like take responsibility away from white people for the slavery that they imposed the structures that they created to enforce that slavery and reinforce that slavery. So this is from July 17th, 2021. The Texas Senate on Friday passed legislation that would end requirements that public schools include writings on women's suffrage and the civil rights movement in social studies classes. Among the figures whose works would be dropped, Susan B. Anthony, Cesar Chavez, and Martin Luther King Jr., whose I Have a Dream speech and Letter from a Birmingham Jail would no longer make the curriculum cut. Bill SB 3, which was passed on a vote of 18-4, is now stalled because the House can't achieve a quorum, while a breakaway group of Democrats, thank you Democrats, get all kinds of crap from people who call you corporate sellouts, and here you are doing the work of the people, leaving the state, and being away from your families in order to try to protect democracy, and as a consequence, slowing this crap down. The special session is set to end on August 6th. The bill would remove more than 24 teaching requirements from a new law that bars the teaching of critical race theory, an academic framework exploring racism's shaping of the country. The law included a list of historical figures, events, and documents required for inclusion in social studies classes. Basically, teach the truth, teach the facts about why white people have 12 times the wealth. It's not because they worked harder. It's because they were given an open door for immigration, and then native lands and, like the slavery system, they just hopped right in on that, and they could, start to build off of that. Other people's stuff. The passed Senate bill would remove most mentions of people of color and women from those requirements, along with the requirement that students be taught about the history of white supremacy and the ways in which it is. The measure would also bar the teaching of the 1619 Project, a New York Times initiative exploring the U.S. history starting at the date that enslaved people arrived in England. This is all about protecting white supremacy. And yet, all of these people who are screeching and yelling and shouting and having temper tantrums about teaching accurately the way that white supremacy has infiltrated, all of this is meant to cover it up. Oh yeah, women just became free. We don't need to talk about how or why. We don't need to talk about all of the pushback and backlash and how one man's vote in one state could have changed history and women's suffrage in this country. How narrow it was, how close it was, how many people, even women, mostly white women, because other women really didn't get voices in that time period, were actively against giving women the vote. And then, of course, all of the critiques of second wave feminism that came along with it. They're not going to learn that in the United States, women couldn't get a bank account until in their own name without a man's permission until the 1970s, right? And on civil rights, yeah, we had slavery and then we fixed it. There you go. All right. Oh, you found the clip? All right, if you want to put it in the chat. Oh, you're not a... Yeah, I'll make you a mod. What? Well, actually, I'll hand out some mod. I'll hand out some wrenches before. I'm just about done. Yeah, I recognize some of these names. Add mod. Yeah, I throw you out there too. Did I already make Nil Magnifico? Oh no, I don't mean to, there you go, add. All right, those are all the people I could find. All right, so yes, this is their agenda. This is their agenda, and here we go. Myth-informed Milwaukee. If you think whiteness and white supremacy are systemic problems in the U.S. today, you are delusional and part of the problem. What? Like, they're literally teaching white supremacy. So, okay, people in the chat, if you want to go quickly, you can. I gotta go because I'm already 5 minutes over my time, and means I have less time to get ready before I go help my friend clean out her basement. So, if you want to hear me cough down the microphone at you some more, you can join me over on my D&D channel. I'm going to be playing a game tonight with some friends. Otherwise, I will probably be, just doing my D&D thing until Friday. Oh no, I got news. Thursday, I am set to talk to Steve Shives about, I reached out to him and I saw the film The Hateful Eight, which I have very complicated feels about that film. And I was like, oh God, I really like to talk about it with somebody who can I geek out with about this movie, Steve Shives. So we are currently planning on, I think it's about 10 o'clock my time on Thursday. And we'll start talking about The Hateful Eight. And yes, we'll see how that goes. So Thursday, Steve Shives, Friday, the happy hour, and then back here next Sunday. So all that's left to be said then until the next time we see each other. Goodbye from me. I've been Kristi. You've been awesome. Have a wonderful Sunday wherever it is, whenever it is you are in the world, and stay healthy, stay safe, and be well until the next time we get in touch. Oh, the live stream thing is you get to watch me actually end the stream with you guys. All right, until next time, y'all. Bye.